The show isn't as deep as the fans would have you believe, but it's also not as bad as the haters claim it to be.
Man, I was stupid. Yeah, going back to watch old videos you make can be a bit cringe-inducing, but I should probably explain why I was so charitable with SAO in the first place. When SAO was first announced, I was excited. I was a huge fan of the Dot Hack franchise, and SAO just seemed so much like my jam. And for a moment it was. And that one moment blinded me for the entire freaking season. It's actually kind of funny. About a couple hours after I posted that review, I really started thinking about SAO's story and I realized it was terrible and I hated it. And it made me angry, and that's why I'm making this video. All of this built up frustration from just how much it doesn't work. Let me make this clear. I don't hate SAO because I feel it betrayed my expectations. It just wasted its potential, and after watching shows like Bacano not get more love while everyone goes crazy for terrible video game simulator, of course my anger will reach a peak. By the way, if you lazy jerks don't want to see me burn SAO at the stake and just want to hear a general summary, then here you go. Man, this show looks so good. Oh, the main characters are terrible. Still looks good. The rules and logic of the show are inconsistent as shit. Oh my god, look at this anime! Stop being so angsty, Kirito. You didn't earn it. Yeah, the music's okay. The story and characters suck and make no sense. There you go. Now let's talk about why this show just does not work. SAO is set in a near-future world where virtual reality has gone through some recent advances, and coupled with its first-of-a-kind MMO, Sword Art Online. About 10,000 players log on launch day and become unable to log out of the game until the 100th floor is cleared, and if a player dies in the game, they die for real. Sounds interesting, right? Well, too bad! Because it only takes up about a fourth of the show, and a good amount of the time is spent and the game is wasted. Now, I will admit this premise is very interesting. A large group of people are trapped in this virtual world for an extended period of time and have to live in it like it's the real world. Now, I'm sure there are a couple of points that people can use to defend SAO. Like, what about the premise of the other story arcs? Or, despite not being part of the show very long, the first story arc is still good, and the first story arc still has a dramatic effect on the rest of the story. Which is a fair point, I suppose. I mean, it's not fair to judge a show that advertises itself mainly with the death game story plot, but only has a story arc for about a fourth of the whole series. Don't worry, I will get to the rest of the show in this video, and yes, the show does start to get better. At episode 17 of the second series. But enough beating around the bush. Let's get this complaint train started. Let's start with the very first episode and go from there. Because let me be real with you. Although this would have been a great start to the series like this, they managed to fuck it up really, really quickly. So it starts off by giving us a brief glimpse of the real world. You don't see much of it, and all you really see are a couple of 10,000 players picking up their pre-order during launch day, and then you are quickly thrust into SAO. This is a good opening for a series that takes place inside of a game. We already know what the real world is like, so you don't have to spend that much time in it. And it is especially important if you're going for the virtual world as reality plot point. So, we see our main protagonist, Kirito, teaching the newbie, Klein, how to fight and how the system works in the game. Alright, we're still going strong. Klein mentions he has plans for pizza and discovers there is no logout button. Kirito explains why this is bad, yada yada yada, and they are teleported to the plaza. We now get this awesome scene of the game's creator, Kayaba, revealing his master plan, and now everyone is trapped in the game. Great! Everyone's avatar takes on their real appearance, obligatory joke about dudes playing as cute girls.
Of course I'm a girl!
A for effort, big guy!
Panic. Kirito tries to leave with Klein ahead of everyone else to get all the good loot first. Klein refuses because he has friends to look after, and Kirito runs into Horizon and screams. Cool. Now, yes, fanboys and fangirls, this was a strong first episode into the series. Until you watch the rest of the show. Okay, let's start with Klein. His time with Kirito is great. Klein was a good way to exposit a lot of info to the viewer without some inner monologue bullshit. So why would you ditch him in the first episode? I know almost more about Klein than I do about Kirito. Why is Kirito going solo in a goddamn MMORPG? No matter how much it looks like it, this world is not a fantasy hero world. It's a virtual world ruled by rules and numbers. Also, going solo is not the main point of an MMO, god damn it. I don't even have to play them to tell you that much. It's called massive multiplayer for a reason. No, I think I can explain why this is, but it requires us to make a couple of concessions for the show for a moment. Let's not see this as a trapped in a virtual world story, and instead view it as a adventuring a new world story. Fantasy adventure comes in a couple of flavors, but a big factor to tell which one it is if Kirito is adventuring alone or in a group. You see, in groups, the characters travel to new locations and their separate reactions allow the group to work off each other and to grow and develop. It's the world that helps us learn more about the characters. A recent example of this would be Konosuba God's Blessing or the Persona series. When they are solo, however, it's reverse. The character travels to different locations and may have temporary companions, but this is all to help us, the viewer, gain a better understanding of what the world that they're traveling in. And the characters take an active role in the story, but they aren't really expanded on because they aren't supposed to be the focus. Good examples of this would be Mushishi, King of Bandits Jing, or Space Dandy. This is the only explanation that I can think of that explains why Kirito does not join Klein and his friends, even though it's in his best interest if he wants to survive, and why he never really sticks with one group through each episode, and why there are massive time skips between each episode. The show wants to focus on the events in the world that would flesh it out, and Kirito is her chaperone, a guide through the entire adventure. Granted, it's a very roundabout and nonsensical way of doing it, but it at least explains why these incredibly stupid choices were made. But that still doesn't really excuse them either, because they always try to make them about Kirito, leaving Kirito in situations which seem distant from any sort of logical reasoning, and brings the story to a grinding halt majority of the arc. It also does not work because we never really stay in the first game long enough for the world building to be really effective later on. We see 3 different worlds for the entire show, and one of them is just the first one with magic. But overall, there aren't that many events in the show that make these worlds interesting, and few that could have fleshed them out are simply used as MacGuffins, don't have that much consequence to our characters or the world. Thing is, they already made this show, and it's called Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi.
The Abenobashi Shopping Arcade?
Abenobashi was a 13-episode series where 2 young kids would travel to alternate dimensions of their hometown each episode, encountering alternate versions of their friends and family. The reason why the show works is because each role is easily recognizable, and they all pertain to our main character's interests as he learns to grow up and stop depending on his obsessions to escape reality. This is what I'm talking about. Since the show focuses on the characters and sets up easy to understand logic, the worlds serve their purpose in showcasing the relationship between the characters. In SAO, the show runs at odds with its own logic, leaving some things going unexplained and some clearly defined rules being ignored for the sake of the plot. Like, say, a character miraculously being able to move their avatar despite being under the paralysis status effect. Man, that's frustrating! That's why it's so hard to take the show seriously. They say it's a virtual world, but then they do these cliched power of love and friendship stuff, which should not work because of the rules they already set up. If you're going to use these tropes, then use them so they can provide a shorthand for the viewer, so you can easily add new things to them to make them more dynamic. Have your tropes say something. Don't just make the trope and stop there. Anyway, let's quickly run through the show's arc to see if we can get a better idea. Arc 1, Trapped in SAO. Everyone's trapped in the game, but half the episodes are not connected to each other whatsoever, and there are huge time skips in between most of the episodes. Listen, writers, I know you can't have your characters being involved in high-stakes action every day, because that's insane, and I also know you can't just show nothing happening in an episode either, because that's boring as hell. But in a story, and especially in RPG, showing the process of a character's development is incredibly important. You don't need to rush to the finish line, you need to make us feel like we came with you on a journey, and we can't do that if you skip the entire journey! We never really see anyone develop their skills in the show. Ever! They just skip to the part where they already have it. Like, why even make it a goddamn RPG if there's gonna be no role-playing? I mean, I know they're setting up the line between reality and VR is being blurred bullshit, but they use it almost exclusively in name only. In the beginning of the show, they use mirrors to make the players' avatars look like they do in real life. But that is completely stupid! If you're trying to do the blurred lines motif, then let them keep their fictional avatars. Have it be a plot point that the players begin to act more like their characters in-game. Let those guys that chose to play as girls in the game have that affect them in the show, and have their friends and allies be only able to recognize them in-game, which in turn would shape their behavior significantly when they go back into the real world. This is a writing staple in these shows for a reason. Fine, whatever. The show breaks its own rules. They try to make Kayaba into misunderstood genius for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. The show breaks its own rules again, and they get out of the game. Next, Arc 2, Fairy Tree MMO. This is probably one of the most realistic depictions in an anime, because this arc takes place in what's essentially a reskinned version of the first game, with just the added gimmicks of factions and a flight mechanic. And unfortunately, the show devolves into a generic rescue the damsel in distress fantasy story, and it is really, really stupid. You could literally cut out this entire arc, and you would change nothing. It is really that pointless. Arc 3, Call of Duty, the MMO. Finally a new world, but it's still very generic. There's an underdeveloped plotline involving someone using a game to help them through a trauma, which is clumsily resolved through another trauma. The show turns into a detective thriller, and they have to participate in a tournament because they ran out of ideas. The story is dragged out for far too long, and could have been split into 2 parts. Arc 4, Filler Guard. You can tell it's filler because they reuse some of the animation. All that happens is that they try to save Baby Cthulhu. I find it kind of funny that the filler is where we finally get an RPG party experience, but whatever. The only thing of consequence that happens is that Kirito gets a sword. There's a few okay character scenes, and this marks the beginning of a transition in how they showed the visuals. Arc 5, the good one. The show is finally more focused, more character-driven, all the major characters are given good roles to play in the story, and there's finally a good example of reality and VR blending together and its effect on people. I'll get into this one more later, but you get the gist, right? I'm having a hard time trying to describe the worlds in this show because they are just so barren. There aren't any particularly memorable landmarks in this show. They all just feel the same. I remember a log cabin in a town square. Wow, amazing. Yeah, sure there are recurring areas, but they hardly have any significant personal connection to the characters. Oh, wait, I forgot. Because it only shows up for one scene in one episode. But there's a grave for a player character where an important emotional scene takes place in the first arc. But yeah, pretty barren for an MMO. I mean, there are plenty of people in the world themselves, but they come off as more along the lines of a sort of window dressing than anything else. Granted, they don't have to all be animated unique characters, but would it kill you to show them doing something semi-unique? A merchant selling rare items. A small party looking for someone to join them for a raid. Players talking strats while waiting for a friend. Just something to make it feel alive. The world isn't exactly interesting to look at either. Like I said, it is beautiful and the architecture certainly looks cool, but they don't really do much with it. All the settings and backdrops look like desktop wallpaper. Don't believe me? Check it. Yeah, pretty, but inconsequential and shallow. Which is a good way to describe the whole show. Whoops, did I just say that out loud? Now on to my biggest gripe with the show. The big reason why I don't like the show to begin with. Kirito. Oh, why Kirito? Why Kirito? Why is Kirito the main character? I mean, like I said, if the show's going for an episodic world-building type of story, Kirito, with his lack of charisma or any definable personality trait, would be perfect for this.
You know what? I'm happy.
But as we've established, it isn't. So it makes the choices made for Kirito that much more jarring. For those of you who are unfamiliar, here's a brief overview of Kirito. Kirito is good at games, but he is primarily a loner. We don't get much of an idea of who he was in the real world, but we do know that he's a big fan of the game's developer, Kayaba, and his nerve gear. He was a beta tester for the game and lives with his mother and sister. And he did kendo that one time. That's it. That's all we have to work with for a majority of the show in terms of his personal background. I'm just gonna say it right here. That is not enough. Come on, the show takes place in an RPG, a character-driven experience. Give us more to work with. It doesn't have to be all at once. Just give me something. Kirito is so frustrating because he's such a stereotypical power fantasy character. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not some stickler who has some absurdly high standard for characters. It's just the power fantasy just doesn't work in the context of the story. So we end up in a situation where Kirito is a loner, but is also inexplicably sociable and popular with girls. He's both compassionate and willing to help others, while at the same time, he's completely focused on his own survival, but because he's a loner, he abandons all the new players to power level himself, which apparently leads to 1/5 of all the players dying on the first floor. And yes, SAO fans, I know in the very next episode that they established that there was a tip guide written by the beta testers that's provided for free at the first city, but the show establishes later on that the guide was out of date and completely worthless when they confront the first boss. Besides, let's be real here, a little booklet is hardly an adequate teacher, and it's just a lazy way to take the blame away from Kirito. So this inevitably brings me back to this question. Why not have Klein be the main character? I mean, yeah, he's not the overpowered badass that Kirito is, but that's the point! For a majority of the series, Klein was the only one with the most amount of character development and the least amount of screen time. Klein was the Naruto to Kirito's Sasuke, a goofy, good-natured underdog who in a time of crisis, steps up to become a leader who protects his friends. Klein was the one with the more fleshed out backstory in the first episode, not Kirito. I'm not even suggesting that Klein replaces Kirito. In fact, I think Kirito could have worked a lot better if the focus was shifted off of him. Klein can be the nice, naive, friend-having leader, and Kirito can be the gloomy loner badass. You literally could have used Naruto as a cheat sheet to flesh out Klein and Kirito's relationship. There also is a big difference between bringing up facts about a character and actually using the facts to flesh them out. And poor Asuna. She gets sidelined so often in the show despite being such a vastly more interesting character than Kirito. A gaming novice doesn't even know not to use her real name on an online game, and yet becomes one of the top players and an inspiration to others. And yet she just ends up being Jasmine from Aladdin.
I am not a prize to be won.
But she totally is. Fortunately, the writers realize this, but Unfortunately, they only realize this by the time of the final arc rolled around. Unlike Kirito, where I'm annoyed by his abundance of tropes, I feel cheated when I look at Asuna. She's built up as such a badass and equal to Kirito, but how do I put this? She suffers from what I like to call princess syndrome, which leads her to have the same problems that Kirito faces, but for the opposite reasons. Let me explain. Because we see so little of her, and the little we do see of her is more focused on arbitrary, stereotypical princess attributes, Asuna takes on a more princess-like character in conjunction with Kirito's power fantasy archetype. Which I guess brings me to something I almost forgot to mention by just how unremarkable they are. The bad guys. I mean, it makes sense for the most part. Aside from the guy from GGO, the antagonists aren't really the focus of the show, but they all feel very similar and lack any depth that could have humanized them. They are all power-hungry sociopaths who take joy in the power they have over others in games. They also inevitably get a scene where they are bringing or about to bring harm onto one of the girls of the show and have to be saved by Kirito, again contributing to our power fantasy. This guy, Bad Guy 2, yeah, let's go with that. Imprisoned people and tried to brainwash them inside a game so he can make a lot of money. I mean, he already has a successful corporation, and it makes no sense why you would make something so clearly unethical that he was bound to get caught regardless if he was successful, but you know, he is evil, after all, and a pedophile, so stab. Edgelord over here is killing the top players in the game because he likes to kill people, and that's it. So he enters a tournament and kills players that he either knows or lives close by to, yeah, it looks like someone didn't think this through. Whatever, he's a bad guy, and, bang. However, none of them compared to our first bad guy, Kayaba. Kayaba somehow developed the VR headset and the game pretty much by himself, which is impossible and doesn't make any sense, but I digress. He somehow managed to keep this a secret from everybody and imprison 10,000 people in his own game. He shows blatant favoritism towards Kirito and cheats in his own game to survive. You could argue, why should the bad guy have to play fair? He's the bad guy. Oh, I don't know, maybe because the show hardly treats him as shut and breaks its own in-universe rules about how the game works to keep him in the show, for practically no reason. Kayaba makes himself the final boss in his own game and dies, and then the show makes him an actual Deus Ex Machina in the next arc. And when we get these weird scenes where we get Kirito defending him, and they always wonder what Kayaba's plan is, like it's like some reoccurring plot line tying it all together, when in reality, he has nothing to do with anything, and he already revealed his intentions in the first freaking episode. If they wanted to make him interesting, make him sympathetic, make him human, then don't let him cheat his own game, and don't turn him into an actual god. And now, dear viewer, it's time to talk about the big one, the last arc, Mother's Rosary. The one I say is the only good one, and I've been listing all the things I don't like about this show from the past 7 pages of the script, so how do they do it? Well, first off, Kirito isn't the main character anymore. I will be the first to admit that Kirito could still work in the context of the show, but not as the main character. Instead, Mother's Rosary finally gives him the role he works best at, a smart helper character who does not get a lot of screen time. Basically Zelda. Our main character instead is Asuna. She still has the whole Jasmine quality about her, this time it having to do with her wealthy parental figure trying to decide her future, and also wanting something else. And yeah, it does kind of suck we get stuck with this cliche for Asuna's character growth, but although it's not handled perfectly, it's still pretty good and much better than what we were getting before. The story in general becomes much more focused on its message and themes than ever before in the series, centered on a new character, Yuki, and her relationship with Asuna, which in turn is woven together well with ways in which the virtual reality games can help people, and how these sorts of new technologies are helping improve people's lives. This is also when the show starts to spotlight something it never really did before the show, imaginative visual gags. Instead of having the characters monologue or make some really cringe-worthy puns, we instead get some good visuals that better represent the overall feel of the experience. The only real bad guy, the mother, is portrayed much better than any other antagonist in the show, which is ironic since she probably is the most cliched out of all of them. The show also does a better job of highlighting playing as a group and strategizing. Background characters feel more dynamic, the unique abilities finally have a good explanation, and finally feels more like the show I wanted SAO to be. Granted, it still has a couple problems. The writers couldn't resist bringing Kayaba up for no reason, even though the story had nothing to do with him, again. And I felt there was some missed opportunities that they could have explored, like some of the more unique MMOs they mentioned. There's a freaking bug MMO! One of the game's message boards to help flesh out the world some more. But I guess that might be too much to ask from this show. SAO is a show that ultimately is a show full of wasted potential, falling back on ill-fitting cliches and inconsistent writing till the end. The show only starts to realize it's 80% in, when it is already too late. The writers had hoped for the next dot hack, but only ended up making Captain N the Game Master.